There's a case, and it's been making the news and stuff. There was a Stanford student, was a former Stanford swimmer, was convicted of, was it sexual assault? But he basically raped a woman who was unconscious behind a dumpster outside of a party, and he was tackled. He was stopped by some bystanders who saw what was happening. And this is very rare. People don't normally do this. There are so many accounts where people walk past crimes in action and don't even call the police or anything. So he got 6 months for raping this unconscious woman. And I think the LA Times and some other pieces have her statement. The prosecutors have released her victim impact statement. But then there's some conflicting stuff with his dad about basically like how his life is ruined now because 20 minutes of action. So much so wrong with this story. But Sean King had a really good piece about how this is an example of how race plays out in our judicial system, right? Sean King had a piece, I believe this was from yesterday. And so Brock Turner is, this standout swimmer from Stanford who raped an unconscious woman in California. And he got 6 months, right? You have former Vanderbilt football player from Tennessee, Corey Beatty, who also raped an unconscious woman, but that was in Tennessee. And he has a mandatory minimum sentence of 15 to 25 years in prison. Same crime, similar set of facts, on its face. There may be other issues, but when you just look at the similarity in the facts and the issues at hand, how is it that this, and I'm not saying that necessarily Corey Beatty should have, I'm not even arguing that Corey Beatty should have a lesser sentence. When you look at disparities, you look at similarly situated defendants, and then you look at race, you will see disparities like this, huge disparities like this. And then you add in, affluence and background, you see huge disparities in sentencing. And the way trials are handled. There's just so much that goes on. So when we talk about criminal justice reform, it's so much more than just making sure, we have, this is the type of stuff we're talking about. We're talking about, dealing with the disparities in our sentencing. We're talking about access to representation. There was a recent piece about Louisiana having no funding for public defenders. That's a problem. You have a right to representation, and they always say if you can't afford representation be provided for you, what do you do when you live in a state that cannot afford to provide representation? So, both these cases, Corey Beatty and Brock Turner's cases, there's eyewitness accounts, there's video, there's something that indicates that a rape did take place, the woman was unconscious. They're both awful acts. When you look at the disparity, right? That is a problem. And these are the kinds of conversations that need our attention. It does not matter who wins these elections and stuff. We need to be focused, and we need to be driving the force and change that happens. There's another really good piece. Both of these are in the New York Times. Sean King writes for the New York Times. One of his co-writers at New York Daily News. New York Times is on my brain because, like I said, I had a little caricature of me in the New York Times today. I was pretty excited about that. But anyway, New York Daily News. Gary Myers wrote a piece today about, and there's a video about his dad, the Stanford rapist's dad, begging for leniency. So this reflects on another former football star, Brian Banks, who spent 5 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. Also a Black man. Again, he went to jail for something he didn't even do and was in jail for 5 years. And now you have, Brock Turner, who was convicted of three felony counts related to a 2015 sexual assault on an unconscious, intoxicated woman, and he's like, it's a skip in a park, 6 months. That's so huge. And the difference, the other kicker here is with the Banks case. One, he was not guilty. It was a false case. Right? It was a false prosecution, but he was 16. He was a teenager. He was not a college student, an adult. He was 16, and he was tried and sentenced as an adult. 41 years. He had up to 41 years in prison, right? Like that, again, the disparities in these cases and how they're handled. Now, you might say, well, okay, those are different places, blah, blah, blah. But Banks was also, I believe that was also a California case. The other one I mentioned was a Tennessee case. But when you look at, now we juxtapose that now with the case of, we juxtapose that now with the case of Jasmine Richards, also in California. Was charged with felony lynching. Okay, what the hell is felony lynching? I know, right? Jasmine Richards, how are you going to charge a Black person in America with anything involving lynching? It's like the wildest thing, considering the history of this country, whether law enforcement or otherwise, with the act of lynching, particularly when it concerns Black people. Charging someone with a very little known law that's been rarely ever used, malicious almost in terms of the prosecution. They're trying to send a point to activists. She has been held out as Black Lives Matter activist, and this related to something that occurred during a protest. Felony lynching is the taking by means of a riot or of another person from the lawful custody of a police officer. So basically, she's been accused of trying to remove someone from a police officer's custody, right? We've seen so many cases of police officers wrongful, detaining of people or whatever. And this is an instance where someone tried to do something about it, and now she was facing 4 years in prison. So she tried to take someone from a police officer who probably should not have been detained by that police officer anyway. As we've seen in a lot of these cases, when police officers detain people at protests, they'll do stuff like, arrest people for resisting arrest, but there's no actual underlying reason for arresting them, right? It's total BS because it's, unfortunately, in some cases, police officers just do stuff because they think they can. So here she is facing 4 years originally. Oh, she was sentenced today, I think. This jerk that has raped a woman and has like no remorse, and he is getting 6 months. How does that make sense? Again, we look at and these are both California cases. We look at our justice system. We look at racial disparities. We look at, how people are valued in the system. We look at biases, because biases actually matter. We talk about prosecutorial bias and misconduct. We need to also talk about judicial misconduct and bias, right? We act like people can just be independent, objective arbiters of justice when they put on the robe and somehow there's somebody brand new. We all walk through life and carry our biases, our prejudices, our predispositions with us. And we see time and time again, there's plenty of evidence to show that happens to the judicial system, from prosecutors, even some of the defense attorneys do it. Some public, there are a lot of really great people who are in the defense bar, who are public defenders. There are some really good people who are prosecutors too, and there's some really good judges out there. I have a really awesome family court judge in my family. However, we do have people out there who, unfortunately, the way they do actions from the bench, it disproportionately and desperately impacts people's lives. And there's something needs to change. We have to, again, we talk about being involved, understanding what's going on. We have to push harder, because and there are other cases where people who have been involved with Black Lives Matter related protests have been arrested and charged excessively, things that are unheard of. Because it's an attempt to silence people, it's an attempt to push them back, it's an attempt to deny access to the means that we have that are supposed to be guaranteed to us by the Constitution, the right to protest, the right to assemble, and basically our freedom of speech. It's a problem. So ultimately, how there was a color change petition. I think last I saw, 78 to 80,000 people had signed this petition. That petition was delivered to the judge prior to sentencing. 1,000 people, I believe, might have been a little bit more or somewhere around there, signed this petition saying that she should not be sentenced. Whatever time she had to spend in lockup, good behavior, just drop it, because this is ridiculous. Felony lynching, the taking away, it's just egregious. And then when we talk about, go back to the Blue Lives Matter law last week, there are things being done in the judicial system instead of actually addressing the real issues we have, like desperate impact and sentencing, like police killings. My godmother, who's a criminal law professor, human rights, international human rights attorney, social justice person, civil rights law, she brought up the issue with me. She said, it's so funny because in a given year, you might have more cops killed by other cops than you have cops actually killed by people, just regular civilians.